Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today to discuss communicating sustainability. My name is Bella Webb. I'm editorial associate at Vogue Business, and I will be your moderator today. Before we begin, I'd like to let you know that a recording of this panel will be made available on demand should you wish to watch it again. Also, don't forget to head over to the event community where you can meet with other attendees and Vogue Business editors. I'll be there, so feel free to say hello. Over the course of this session, we will explore how brands can communicate their sustainability efforts. We'll look at education, greenwashing, and the fine line between transparency and effective communication. And now, before we begin, let's introduce our panel. Celine Seman-Vernon is a system designer and co-founder of Slow Factory Foundation, a public service organization working at the intersection of environmental and social justice. August Bard-Bringas is the co-founder of Stockholm-based brand Asket, which focuses on a permanent collection of mindfully produced quality and timeless garments. And finally, Shilpa Shah is the co-founder and CXO of Kiana, an apparel and accessories brand based on the principle of fewer, better. Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks, it's great to be here.
So the latest Vogue Business Index, which surveyed 3,000 Vogue readers across 13 markets, found that there is a knowledge divide between what brands are doing about sustainability and what actually reaches consumers. Just 15% of luxury consumers are aware of the sustainability policies of the brands that they are buying from. I think it's important to start by defining sustainability and what we mean when we use that word, because there are a lot of brands who would be classed as sustainable, but might not necessarily use that terminology themselves. August, can you tell us a little bit about which terminology Asket uses and why you've chosen to kind of position yourselves in that way?
Absolutely. So to start off, we don't use the word sustainability either externally nor internally. It's too vast a concept to use as sort of a single messaging. So we prefer to talk about acting and being responsible, or acting responsibly or being responsible.
Shilpa, can you tell us a little bit about Kiana's sustainability messaging? Because I know that, again, this isn't something you identified with in your communications for the first few years. Tell me a little bit about how you now position yourselves and how consumer perception of your brand has changed since you started using the terminology of sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. So for us, from the very outset of our brand, we've always had values kind of at the core. Just really thinking about the socioeconomic kind of world in which we play in and how those factors actually impact us and how we meet our consumers' needs. So we've always had integrity at our core. We've always been about micro industries, creating jobs wherever we went. And we found in the early years that actually talking about where the product was made first kind of took away from the connection that the consumer had with the product itself. And it wasn't really furthering those values in their minds at the outset. So it became really important to us to always embed integrity in everything we do as kind of a layer that we would take the journey with the customer on. So it was always something that we always followed up with in our communication. But something that we found in the last couple of years is that not putting that out in the forefront has made customers think that we're actually not sustainable, or brands are not operating with integrity if they're not using it as a marketing tool. So for us, integrity was always a core value, but we didn't want to use it as a marketing kind of trick to show consumers that this is why you should buy. And when we started realizing that they were actually assuming that we were not a sustainable business or we didn't have integrity at our core, we started to put that more in the forefront, but still doing it in a very thoughtful, intentional way to say that, look, sustainability is a journey, not a destination. It's not some kind of ideal state that you reach. And so it is a pillar of our communication, and it's a pillar of our brand. But here is our sustainability stance on longevity, that it really is a mindset that you change the way you shop and collecting fewer, better things. And once we started doing that, our customers really understood that in addition to not only championing quality beauty, that we also represented a whole nother layer, and that the Guyana story only got richer with time. So I do agree that sustainability is not the most ideal word. It represents so many different things. And we too tend to talk more about producing responsibly from a wage perspective, about making sure that you use materials that really have longevity. That's really our sustainability stance. But without using the word sustainability, because the industry is using it, you can't really pierce through to consumer mindset. So we do feel like it's important to use that word and tell them that we are a sustainable business, but here's how. And here's how your own behavior change can support this effort.
So you're kind of following up on the more vague terms that maybe resonate a bit more with consumers, with the kind of detail that resonates more with your own definition of sustainability.
Exactly right. So if Fewer Better Things is about a shopping mindset, that you're collecting pieces that really are going to last with you during the test of time, that really is a sustainable mindset, because you're not overproducing, you're not overbuying, you're not overconsuming, and ultimately, buying anything in a sense is not a sustainable thing, right? Like it's not buying new clothing requires a lot of elements in order to produce those items, and so for us to say, look, we are in one static, sustainable place that is a form of greenwashing. So for us, we really want to say, look, this is how you can shop sustainably to match your sustainable mindset. But we are always saying, here are all the things that we ourselves can do better, and being very authentic about sharing that journey with our consumer.
Celine, when brands are accused of greenwashing, one of the main criticisms is that they use vague or misleading language, that they're not backing up their claims with action. Why do you think that language is so important in this conversation, and how can brands make sure they're using the right language?
Yes, thank you so much for this question. I think that, we are looking for a one word fits all, and one big word that expresses this spectrum of things that the fashion industry is. It's a very complex system, and it doesn't, one word cannot express or explain exactly what goes on behind the scenes, or if this thing is good or bad, because it's not binary. It's not something that either is good or bad. So at the Slow Factory, and with my partner, Sophia Lee, we launched a TV show called All of the Above. And in it, we talk about this idea that sustainability is a spectrum. We can't just talk about it in a good or bad way. It's not false or true. It's not a computer. And so essentially what we need to look into when we're wanting to embark on a journey around sustainability is being communicative, being transparent as a brand, and being able to really lift the sort of veil behind the scenes as much as possible, so that the public feels this connection of trust between the brand and their claims or their processes or their systems. Because what we call sustainable in a big blanket statement, it's very hard to measure. It's hard to say if that was true or false, because like I said, sustainability is not a binary. So it's not something that I could validate. I oftentimes get this question that, is this brand sustainable? And it's very, very hard to say, yes, this brand, no, it's impossible almost. I wouldn't say impossible, but we have to first define what we mean by sustainability. What are the criteria we care about, we are looking for? What are the long-term goals? Because in sustainability, or in at least a climate positive journey, we need to be able to have long-term goals and measure and compare and make sure we are making progress along the way. So let's say we are starting with a material that's using pesticides in the beginning. Let's say it's cotton, it's using pesticide. This is the community that we are working with, and we are trying to get them from diverting from pesticides and using a regenerative agriculture. And maybe that phase of the project, after a year and a half, succeeded, and that was sustainable. but we are still using plastic in our packaging, and we are shipping too much. And there are always so many different criteria, correct? So this, just to answer this more quickly, I think that sustainability is a journey, it's a spectrum. It needs to be identified on the long term. We need to have the notion of time in order for us to assess whether or not this was a good idea or not. And also, as much as possible, to shift the conversation around what's happening behind the scenes. So brands, when they are shifting some of their budgets from marketing into impact, into reinvesting into their systems, to making sure that they are resilient, that they are regenerative, those types of brands oftentimes have a stronger relationship with their public, because they don't need to sell a dream. They're working on real projects.
I think you raise a really important kind of caveat to this whole conversation, that sustainability is incredibly complicated, and there is a lot of scientific and data-driven detail that is needed to prove progress. So with that in mind, and this is kind of open to whoever wants to answer first, how can brands balance transparency and sharing that progress on all of the different and kind of ever-evolving list of concerns that consumers have? How can they balance transparency and making that information accessible with also having engaging communications?
Where we started was about creating products with integrity, fewer but better garments, very similar to the philosophy that Shilpa described also. And to us, basically, when we started, sustainability wasn't necessarily on the top item on our agenda. We wanted to create fewer but better pieces, the garments that we were missing. And with a permanent collection, by force, we had to create a lot fewer garments, and we could put more effort into those. And so that less is more mantra was there from the beginning. And what we tried to do was to simply focus on conveying the quality and the integrity of the product, which goes hand in hand with sustainability, and lack of better words, that it takes time for a seamstress to create something with integrity. It requires the best resources, and it takes time to grow the right cotton in a regenerative manner, or with sort of biodiversity in mind. And so for us, what we talk about mostly is the integrity of the product and the inherent qualities of the product. How much it took to create that product, the steps involved, the details, the stitching, the fibers and the yarns. And so we're kind of going into a spectrum of nerdiness about the product that will appeal to our target customer, which is an urban male in his 30s. And even if that customer necessarily isn't looking for sustainability criteria when shopping, you are conveying sustainability or integrity at the same time. So it kind of goes hand in hand. But then we make sure that we create these products on the best possible foundation, and that we make all of the information about the origin, traceability, about the impact, and even about pricing and costing available to the customer, because it is so multifaceted. But we've kind of put that secondary. It's all there on the product page when you visit us. But first and foremost, it is about the integrity of the product. And then as you scroll down, as you become more interested, or if you are more interested from the start, you will sort of peel off these layers.
So the information is all there, but it's not necessarily in every single type of communication that you do. It's not necessarily what you focus on in campaigns.
Exactly.
I think also what's really interesting about Asker is your impact receipts. Can you tell us a little bit about those and how they kind of play into this conversation?
Absolutely. So when we started, we used transparency as a means to convey the integrity of the product. We're an online only business, so you can't touch and feel them before you buy or you transact with us. And so we use transparency to try and create a digital manifestation or a proxy of quality, showing the pricing, showing the factories, the stories of the seamstresses, and loading those garments with more of a narrative. But then for every question we asked, basically, you know, we had 3 more follow-up questions. Every door we opened, there were 3 more behind them. It's constant learning. And so over time, we expanded our notion of transparency to full traceability, breaking down every component of every garment into all of the sub-processes and disclosing that information. And then when we felt that we'd come far enough with that, we had covered cost and origin transparency. We had a great platform to also be transparent in terms of impact, to use all the data from our supply chain to disclose not just what it costs and where it comes from, but actually what it took from the planet to create that garment. And to confront the consumer with that information and just the facts, no sort of relative claims in terms of impact savings or no offsetting messaging. Simply, this is what this garment takes in terms of CO2, energy, and water for you to be able to buy it, and trying to nudge people into questioning whether or not it is actually worth it. Do they really need it that badly?
I think it's really interesting that you present them, like you said, as the kind of cold hard facts, because there would be people who would say that effective communication around the carbon impact, for example, would include a sort of contextualization of what other similar products have as their impact. Why did you choose to do that?
I think that that contextualization is still would still be helpful, and that's something that we as a small team probably just haven't come around to doing. I think it is, you know, with, for instance, the electrification of automotive, you're looking at kilowatt hours per mile and per kilometer, and that is going to become a household metric eventually as we grow more conscious as a society. Right now, those metrics are definitely not household or top of the mind metrics, and it would actually be helpful to add contextualization. You know, 2.5 kilos of CO2 for a T-shirt. What is that in terms of miles driven in a normal petrol car, or in terms of how many times you can charge your cell phone? So that's not something that we're excluding, but what we are excluding is, you know, using this information to try and convey some kind of savings, or to kind of, you know, clean the conscience of the consumer before that purchasing decision, that, oh, I can buy this because it's offset, it won't impact anyone, or I can buy this because it saves energy. Nothing saves energy. Well, you know, everything that's produced has a cost and has an impact. So you can't save impact just as little as you save money buying on sale.
Shilpa, I want to come to you now. Can you tell us how your approach differs from Asket's?
It's there's a lot of similarity in that we really talk about quality and the integrity of the product first. I mean, ultimately, as sustainable brands, we are in the difficult business of trying to change consumers' behavior, right? We are encouraging consumers to make better choices, to shop at prices that is more expensive than fast fashion and lower than luxury. So these kinds of positioning points of our brands are it's complicated, right? We're teaching them what sustainability costs, and it's expensive, right? Like making these choices requires money, and we have to show them that there's a value to that. So we do a lot of similar things about really focusing on the quality first. A lot of the Kuyana magic is in the details of the numbers of the material itself, right? So, you know, our silk garments are at a 24 to 26 mummy count. They drape like a sari, right? Whereas the, you know, contemporary brands out there are selling silk at 16 or 18 mummy count. And if you have a better silk, you have a better alpaca, better cashmere, it's gonna last so much longer. And then we're embedding the versatility in the design that you can wear it over and over and over again. And so really focusing the consumer conversation on the price per wear rather than here's the outright price, and you might buy this garment for sale and it's only gonna cost you $50, and you might buy a Kuyana sweater for $295, you know, $295, but that price per wear is you're gonna wear it so much, and we're gonna enable you on all of the looks, etc., that we can embed in that versatility. I think maybe where there's a little bit of difference is that, you know, like, and it could be a consumer mindset thing, you know, that the female consumer, there's so many things consumers in general have to think about, right? And so what we're trying to do is just in that repeat conversation, and I'm sure I don't even want to say it's a differential, because I think, we have so many shared values, and I think this is where sometimes the conversations get stuck at, and what we're really trying to do is disrupt all those other brands that are not focused on this as much. But like we also, like in the Kuyana philosophy, really just about, in our communication style specifically, is really doing what we call as the bite snack meal. So you give the consumer the bite that this is, sustainably made, it's made in Italy, it has the best quality material. Okay, if you click through, here's the snack. Like, I'm going to give you a little bit more. I'm going to make you fall in love with the garment, because if she doesn't fall in love with it, if she doesn't have a fashion moment, she's not going to value it. She's not going to want to wear it. She's not going to feel confident in it. And so therefore we've already failed. If she's not going to make a fashion choice, then we've lost her already. So we're not going to give her all of that information at once. But, for those consumers that really do care, then we give them the meal. Like, they can click through anywhere, get to all of our sustainability initiatives, our goal for longevity. And then we follow up with her after, right? With more emails to say, also, here's what else it means, right? So I think maybe our approach is just not to give it to her all at once, and that we spread it out. And ultimately, our main goal is that women, men, we all need brands we can marry again, that have values that they adhere to, that are consistent. The news headline said, e-commerce company wants you to buy less. And that was crazy. Like, everyone's like, that's like, how does that make any business sense? And what we knew is that when we went into consumers' homes and saw how they interact with the Guyana pieces, we didn't even make many things at that time, but those were always the pieces she was grabbing. And so we were proving out that if you have the right pieces, if they're designed with intention, that no matter what, you're going to get that value over and over and over again. And that's our real goal, is to really give her that longevity, to show her that this is not, it's in the actual piece itself in so many ways that we're doing our communication.
I want to kind of dig into this idea of longevity, because like you said, that one really kind of important facet of it is having that fashion moment where you fall in love with the garment and you want to cherish it for a long, long time. But then on the other side, it's the kind of material composition and how the garment is actually made that allows for that longevity. And I know that you have some kind of nuances and compromises, maybe even in the material compositions that you use. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and how consumer awareness of what we deem sustainable materials is kind of in a slight conflict with what actually allows for longevity?
Absolutely. And I think, Celine, you'll have a lot of information on this as well, but we're always internally talking about the nuance of sustainability versus longevity. And so you can say that, if we, in one sense, a brand is super sustainable by using biodegradable cotton, that's wonderful, right? Like, and we applaud that effort, but we know biodegradable cotton is not going to last as long. It's not going to last as many washes. And so therefore you're going to have a consumer. I mean, even with cashmere, if it's overwashed and over treated, then it doesn't last as long. And so making sure that we actually embed the right materials that give it longevity, because then which one's more sustainable? We ask ourselves, like, some of our cotton t-shirts have a little elastane in it, right? Like, it has a little plastic. And if we said out to the world that we're an anti-plastic business, we would get headlines. But is that what actually lasts for the consumer over time? And it doesn't. You can get so much more wear if you add a little bit of spandex, a little bit of stretch, and those products are going to last that much longer. So we still choose to add the plastic, right? We're finding recycled plastic options now, and thankfully that those are becoming more and more plentiful. I mean, we are a predominantly leather business. Is that sustainable? I don't know. It is a byproduct of the meat industry. Is the meat industry culpable of many harmful things as well? Yes, absolutely. However, mushroom leather, apple leather, they don't last as long, right? So how do we at this juncture make the right choices and, empower our factories, our suppliers around the world, our consumers, and really involve them in this conversation to work together?
Celine, what do you have to add to that? Any thoughts?
Yes, I'm writing a lot of notes. So
I saw.
For me to be, you know, just included, to hear about the logic behind certain things, and to be able to hopefully allow some brain elasticity around certain concepts. So one of them is lasting versus regenerative. The idea of lasting, an object that lasts for a long, long time, still has to be factoring into it that there is going to be an end of life at the end of the
Yes.
day, even if that object is a luxury item. I mean, luxury is a different category because there is resale, there is the increasing value. We're in a different bucket, okay? But when we are talking about apparel that we are wearing that may or may not tear, what happens with the culture of repairing, what happens to the culture of upcycling? I think it's getting a lot of respect now in the fashion industry, with tons of collaborations with emerging designers like Colina Strada, like Bethany Williams, and so many patchwork design and identity. So that's for the what if it doesn't last, what do we do with it? But the idea of an object that would last over and over again or last longer, it still stretches the responsibility that a waste-led design system needs to be factored into this object when this object ends its life, because this object will eventually have an end of life. Like, it's not an infinite object that will never die. Like, so a lot of times we try to talk about everything we make returns to the earth as either food or poison. That's something that we developed at the Slow Factory. And around this concept, there are so many workshops and methodologies and system designs that we develop to help designers and businesses understand how to design from the beginning a waste-led design system. How to understand this idea of lasting versus regenerative, or this idea of extraction versus regenerative. Because in the mainstream, I would say in the global north, most of our clients are in the global north and partners, regeneration is a foreign concept. Okay, it's very, very far from the culture. It's very far from the systems that we are familiar with. And, you know, we exist in a very linear system that is built on extraction, and output is waste. And we want to push the output as far as possible by creating high quality products. But at the end of the day, there will be an end of life, and we need to address that. And I also want to address the alternative leather space. Slow Factory is deeply invested in alternative leathers. We have ourselves developed a nanocellulose leather that is now going to market. I think that to say that they don't last as much is not true, Shilpa, and let me tell you why. I think that the alternative leather space has not yet had the chance to be compared to the traditional leather space or the animal leather space. And furthermore, the space of the alternative leather space is experimenting still on lowering carbon emissions, lowering this idea between this gap between extraction and regeneration. How can we create a closed loop within those new materials from the beginning, so that when the end of life comes, these items can be either reused or compostable, or and so on and so forth.
And Celine, I couldn't agree more with everything you're saying. I mean, I think the conversation has really shifted, and we've been playing a lot more with non-animal leathers that to actually see how they do perform over time. Those supply chains are now just opening up, because it's been a question of, you know, are they going to be plentiful enough to continue to make the product? Are we going to have this supply of material over time? Do we have local suppliers in, Argentina and Italy who are used to working with this material so they can craft it in a luxury way? And we're so encouraged by what we're seeing, because the conversation, I think, in the old days was, animal leather versus vegan leather, and vegan leather a lot of times is plastic. And I think that's the part of conversation where you're like, look, we don't offer vegan because we don't actually want petroleum. So you're not making a better choice by choosing vegan. And those are the kinds of conversations that we've had. The main goal for us, and I know Ask It feels the same way, is just keep it out of landfill, right? Like that's the main thing. Get into another, like, okay, if you want to feel like pink today and yellow tomorrow, make sure, pink today goes to somebody else who can use it, another woman, that it can actually be resold, that it can be reworn, and ultimately, if it is damaged after you've done care, repair, everything else that you do, recycle it. So yeah, those are the things that are so important.
100%. And again, it goes back to what we were saying in the beginning. It's a spectrum. It's a series of things. It's all of the above. When we are looking at regenerative system, to us, it's so exciting. It's almost like basically entering this very, very innovative space where there's so much innovation, there's so much creativity, to be able to think about these circular systems, to be able to think about circularity, not just about the end of life, but also throughout this system. How can we create these closed loop systems where it is effectively regenerative? It doesn't have to be linear. It doesn't have to be extractive. And so for us, that's the exciting part. Oftentimes I get the question, do you think technology is going to be the one that makes us become sustainable or whatever, because we want to trace the item? Doesn't matter if you trace it back to the landfill. I'm telling you, that's where it's going. So let us, use technology, our creativity, in order for us to really close the loop as much as possible. So yes, there's quality over quantity. Of course, that's like one of the basics. But also there is this idea that we have so much already that has been created. We are sitting on piles and piles of dead stock currently.
Yeah.
What is the dead stock strategy at the moment? How do we popularize Frankenstein clothing? How do we popularize this idea that we need to upcycle and it needs to become a core part of how we design businesses? Why do we have to go into these noble materials that are pure when we know that there is 60 years left of topsoil on our planet, including all crops, food? When we know there's so much food insecurity, why are we prioritizing organic cotton when there is a crop that is so thirsty, that contributes to dehydration of the soil and eventually drought? So there are new ways, new technologies, of course, but there are systems that have been existing from a long time. We are sitting on piles and piles of already made clothes. What is our demanufacturing strategy? What is our design, like waste-led design processes, so that we don't waste, so that we start from an existing garment? And so those are the things that we work at Slow Factory. We work with many brands. We popularize these terms as well with the public. We conduct a lot of public-facing workshops that allow people to do that in their own homes, but also young designers to start thinking creatively outside the box. Why start with a virgin material when you can start with the world's library of materials that are already out there? So those are the things that I think are worth us exploring in what is the future of sustainable fashion.
I want to bring it back a little bit to consumer education, because I think when we're talking about systems in this way and we're talking about end of life and circularity, one of the really important parts of that is, how do we educate consumers to be active participants in those systems and to engage with brands in a way that matches brands' intentions when they're communicating about sustainability and their efforts? August, maybe you can tell us a little bit about what Asket is doing on this front. I know you recently had a garment care campaign, for example.
Absolutely. So, I mean, I think what it comes down to for us is to restore the appreciation for clothing. We have become accustomed to the fact that it is cheaper and more convenient to replace a broken t-shirt by buying a new one than to repair it. And everything is getting cheaper and cheaper and is being produced faster and faster. So with that in mind, of course, we lose the appreciation for what it takes to create clothing. Back in the day, my parents, my grandparents, everyone knew a little bit about seams and construction, and you would kick the tires before you decide to buy something. That's no longer the case. So step one is to restore that appreciation with the narrative of what it takes to create the garments. Because if you can charge these garments with meaningfulness, with the reason why you bought them not being that it was on sale, but because I explored the entire journey, I saw a documentary on Asket.com about the farms and where it came from, then you will inherently motivate the customer to wear and use that garment longer, to care for it better. In the caring sense, we have a garment portal that with a library of tips and tricks on how to best care for your clothing, both in a way that minimizes water and energy usage, but also preserves the garment in the first place. We're finally launching our take back program, where we are assuming responsibility for the end of life scenario. We've been sort of working for the first 5-6 years now, leaning back on the fact that we're creating garments that are lasting, that are designed to last for a long time, just like Celine said, but things are catching up with us. But as soon as we can actually show where your clothing ends up in an entirely new sweater, if you're sending back a cashmere sweater, we'll make a post-consumer recycled cashmere sweater out of it. We already have those. We already have the mills set up. I think that's when it's going to be super motivating for the customer to engage with it. I can't say for sure how it's going to go, but step one is to open up and make that take back and that collection as convenient as possible and as motivating as possible for the customer.
Celine, one of the big initiatives Slow Factory has worked on this last year is its open education program, which is a series of talks and workshops hosted by Black, Brown, Indigenous and minority ethnic scholars. I've enjoyed everything from the history of microplastics to fashion and colonialism. It's been hugely informative. How do you see the relationship between education, sustainability and communications?
Yes, for sure. Well, I'm biased because we are, a school, a lab. So I'm going to say education is the foundation of progress. Educating women and girls falls number 5 on a list of 100 by the Project Drawdown as most effective ways to lower carbon emissions. Education is the most accessible way for us to popularize these concepts that we call sustainability literacy. We've been in this space for so long, and prior to that, since the early 2000s, my work has been in open education, peer-to-peer learning, and in access to information, just period, access to information for everybody. And so this idea that making sustainability literacy accessible to all, as inclusive as possible, as well as with equity at the heart of it. That's why we have our teachers coming from the global majority. We want to explore different ways to think about sustainability, climate positive solutions, because several of the innovations already exist. That's also why we are so excited to be exploring these ideas. These innovations have already been developed, whether they are in a lab, in a small scale, or whether they are ancient and century olds. They already exist. What we found important in education was this idea also of going beyond what culture is accustomed to. And the more we are able to popularize certain terms or to remove the guilt and the shame around this idea of joining the climate movement or being sustainable, or what is exactly the impact that we create on an individual level, what is the impact that we create on a collective level, how do we effectively reach those goals in time, as the UN has stated, how do we lower our carbon emissions by 50% in time before 2030. And so education is key in all of these concepts and solutions. It's also connected to how we communicate, because we have a very popular class about greenwashing, actually. And in it, we discuss what is greenwashing? What is it that we are calling out this idea of greenwashing? It's actually misinformation. At the end of it, it is fake news. We are fighting all the same fight. We want real information. We want trusted information. We want an ethical society. And I think that that's where greenwashing comes in as another term for fake news, I guess. So we also talk a lot about cancel culture. How effective is that? We have a whole class around these types of a deep dive into exploring the most effective ways in being part of an active part of our society, to really go beyond the idea that we are just merely consumers. We are the public. We have a lot of power, and I think education really emboldens designers, researchers, activists, scientists into really coming together and reshaping the way that we define sustainability.
I think we are running out of time. So to summarize, we have a few key takeaways here. if you are communicating about sustainability, make sure that your actions are backing up your messaging. So don't make vague claims, empty promises, or misleading claims. I think we've realized throughout the course of this conversation that consumers expect transparency. So all the information that consumers might want, all of the concerns they might have, need to be addressed somewhere. That doesn't necessarily need to be front and center of every single marketing campaign. As Shilpa said earlier, you can have that bite, snack, meal approach. And I think education is also a massive key takeaway here. As you said, Celine, education can achieve a lot of the same KPIs as marketing, but it also helps to improve broader sustainability literacy and back up brand communications with responsible buying behaviors from consumers, which is kind of the missing link here, I suppose. And finally, it's not just about what you say, it's also about how you say it. There are a whole other host of impacts we haven't had time to discuss today about the impacts of emails, of influencer gifting, mail outs, all of these kind of elements of modern fashion communication that we don't necessarily consider when we talk about sustainability. Just finally, from our panelists, is there anything else that you would like to add as your kind of key takeaways for the people watching at home?
I liked when you said, when Celine was talking about traceability, and that's something that we always say, it's not enough to be transparent or traceable. It's what are you tracing it back to? Like, what is it actually going to? What are the practices that they have? And just, like always thinking that way, that these terms can be buzzy, and like as a consumer, it could be confusing. And I think the more that brands work together to start showing those standards so that consumers really can compare, the stronger it will be. And so just like always thinking about just, okay, what's beyond that word? What's beyond sustainable how, traceable to what? Like just always asking the next following question just to make sure that, that you can get a little beyond the headline of the communication itself.
August, anything to add?
As Shilpa explained, you guys were criticized for not being sustainable, but you were actually doing a lot more than you were communicating. And then there's the other spectrum of people that are over communicating, but underacting or underdoing, basically. I think that if you're setting out to try and sort of improve your practices or create a responsible business or lead a responsible business, try and really embed your values into the core of your operations, because it's going to be so hard if this is an afterthought, if it's something that's applied just to pay lip service to your customers or your audience. It needs to be an integral part of what you do for yourself and your team to be motivated in that pursuit, and see these efforts as a way to just create a better product. Because as I mentioned, responsibility or integrity and product quality and nerdiness, all of that goes hand in hand. It's different words for the same thing.
And Celine, any final thoughts from you?
Yes, definitely. I think I would encourage brands, big and small, to rethink their marketing strategy and to reinvest this money into impact, into re-improving their own systems and using that as a storytelling point to be able to reinvest in practices that enhance either their own systems or other people's systems, and to also look into education as an alternative way to telling your story, because we have seen a lot of progress in that space around investing in education and impact at the same time.
And that's everything we have time for. Thank you all for joining us today. It has been an absolute pleasure to explore communicating sustainability with you. For everyone watching at home, you can send any follow-up questions to ask@voguebusiness.com, and you'll be able to watch this panel back on the Vogue Business Sustainability Forum website. Again, don't forget to head over to the event community. I will be there along with some other Vogue Business editors, so please come and say hello. And thank you again for joining us. Enjoy the rest of the Vogue Business and Shopify Sustainability Forum. Goodbye.